Sign this prenup. Hurry up, Penelope Carter demanded, her icy tone cutting through the room as Felicia Thompson, a radiant black teacher, faced a document that would define her worth in the eyes of her fiancé's wealthy white family. This tense moment sets the stage for a story of love, betrayal, and a shocking revelation that flips the script. Where are you listening from today? Perhaps Chicago, like Felicia, or somewhere across the globe. What do you think happens when a woman judged for her modest roots uncovers a secret that changes everything? Will love triumph, or will hidden truths tear it apart? Subscribe to our channel to catch every twist in this gripping tale and share in the comments where you're tuning in from. You won't want to miss how one signature sparks a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. The rain tapped a soft rhythm against the windows of Brood Awakening, a tucked-away coffee shop in Chicago's bustling heart. Felicia Thompson sat at her usual corner table, a fortress of spelling tests and red pens spread before her. At 28, she was a vision, her dark skin glowing under the warm cafe lights, her tight curls pulled back to reveal sharp cheekbones and eyes that sparkled with quiet determination. Teaching third grade at Maple Grove Elementary was her calling. The modest paycheck couldn't dim the thrill of watching a child's face light up when they cracked a tricky fraction or read their first chapter book aloud. Her students were her world, their small victories her treasure. Every Tuesday after the school bell rang, she'd settle here, grading papers with a steaming latte, her sanctuary amid the chaos of lesson plans and parent emails. Today, the cafe hummed with its usual crowd, hipsters typing furiously on laptops, retirees murmuring over chessboards. Felicia barely noticed, her focus on a particularly creative misspelling of catastrophe, when a laugh broke through the ambient chatter. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, unguarded burst, warm and infectious. She looked up, her pen pausing mid-mark. At the next table sat a man, maybe early 30s, his hazel eyes crinkling as he shook his head at his phone. His tailored navy suit screamed money, but his grin was pure, unpretentious joy. He caught her staring and flashed an apologetic smile. "Sorry," he said, his voice smooth as the espresso on her table. "My friend just sent me the cheesiest dad joke in history. Why did the scarecrow become a motivational speaker? Because he was outstanding in his field." Felicia's lips twitched, a laugh bubbling up despite herself. "That's awful," she said, setting down her pen. "Your friend needs better material." His eyes lit up, and he leaned forward, resting his phone on the table. "I'm Ulysses Carter, by the way. And you are—" "Felicia Thompson," she replied, extending a hand, her nails painted a soft coral. His handshake was firm, his palm warm, and something about the way he held her gaze made her pulse skip. They fell into conversation as if they'd known each other for years. Ulysses was an investment banker at a glossy downtown firm, but he didn't carry the arrogance she'd expected from his world. He asked about her students, genuinely curious, laughing as she recounted the time little Jamal insisted photosynthesis was a new dance move. "Third graders are wild," she said, her hands animating the story. "Last week, I had to stop a full-on pencil sword fight during math. I'm pretty sure they think I'm part teacher, part referee." Ulysses threw his head back, laughing again, and Felicia felt a warmth she hadn't expected. He shared stories of his own, late nights crunching numbers, clients with egos bigger than their portfolios, but always circled back to her. "What's it like seeing a kid get it for the first time?" he asked, leaning closer, his cufflinks glinting under the cafe's pendant lights. She told him about Maria, a shy girl who'd beamed brighter than the sun when she read her first full sentence. His eyes softened, and Felicia felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. The hours melted away. Her latte grew cold, her papers untouched, but she didn't care. Ulysses was different. Not the slick finance bro from some cliché movie, but a man who listened, who laughed at her quirks, and made her feel like her small world mattered. He teased her about her red pen, calling it her wand of justice, and she shot back, challenging him to grade a spelling test. "I'd give them all A's for effort," he grinned, dodging her playful swat. By the time the barista announced closing, they'd swapped numbers, and Ulysses promised to bring her coffee during her next lunch break. "You're gonna need it with those pencil-wielding warriors," he winked. Over the next 6 months, their connection deepened. Ulysses became a fixture in her life, showing up after school with her favorite hazelnut latte, his tie loosened, his smile bright. He'd sit in her classroom, rolling up his expensive sleeves to help hang student artwork, taping up crayon-drawn masterpieces like they belonged in a gallery. On weekends, they'd wander Grant Park, their fingers brushing as they debated pizza versus tacos, his laughter echoing through the trees. Felicia felt herself falling hard. Ulysses seemed to feel it too, his eyes lingering on her when he thought she wasn't looking, his texts lighting up her phone late at night with silly memes or thoughtful notes about her day. One evening, as they sat on a park bench, the city skyline glittering in the distance, Ulysses took her hand. "You make my world better, Felicia," he said, his voice low, earnest. "I've never met anyone like you." Her heart raced and she squeezed his hand, believing this was the start of something real. She didn't know then about the mansion in the suburbs, the mother with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, or the piece of paper that would test everything she thought she knew about love. For now, in the glow of that moment, Felicia Thompson was just a teacher in love, caught in the magic of a chance meeting that felt like fate. The tires of Ulysses Carter's sleek black sedan crunched against the gravel drive of his family's suburban mansion, a sprawling colonial that loomed like a monument to wealth. Felicia Thompson, seated beside him, smoothed the hem of her navy dress, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm. She'd spent hours choosing the outfit, hoping it struck the right balance. Elegant, but not trying too hard. Her tight curls were swept into a low bun, accentuating the graceful curve of her neck and the glow of her dark skin under the evening light. Ulysses squeezed her hand, his hazel eyes warm. "They're gonna love you," he said, but the knot in Felicia's stomach tightened. She wanted to believe him, to trust that the man she'd fallen for over coffee and classroom stories could bridge her world to his. But as they stepped out, the mansion's towering columns and polished oak doors felt like a warning. She was entering a realm where she might not belong. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and old money. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms across marble floors, and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors stared down from the walls. Felicia's flats echoed softly as Ulysses led her to the dining room, where his parents awaited. Penelope Carter, his mother, stood like a queen surveying her court, her silver blonde hair pinned impeccably, her emerald dress tailored to perfection. A retired corporate lawyer, she carried herself with the authority of someone who'd never lost a case. Her smile was thin, practiced, never reaching her pale blue eyes. "So, you're the teacher," she said, extending a manicured hand, her tone slicing the word teacher into something small, almost pitiful. Felicia shook her hand, forcing a smile, her skin prickling under the weight of that gaze. Walter Carter, Ulysses' father, offered a warmer greeting. His graying hair and kind eyes softened the room's chill, but his glance toward Penelope betrayed his deference to her. A real estate magnate, he moved with quiet confidence, asking Felicia about her day as they sat at a mahogany table set with bone china and silver cutlery. The spread was lavish: roasted lamb, glazed asparagus, a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Felicia's monthly rent. She tried to focus on the food, but Penelope's presence was a spotlight, scrutinizing every move. "Teaching must be so noble," Penelope said, slicing her lamb with surgical precision. "Spiritually rewarding, I mean. The hours must be nice, even if the pay, well." She trailed off, her lips curving into a smile that felt like a blade. Felicia's fork paused midair. The jab landed, sharp and deliberate, cloaked in politeness. She forced a laugh, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "It's not about the pay," she said. "It's about the kids. Seeing them light up when they get something new. That's worth more than a paycheck." Walter nodded, asking about her students, his interest seeming genuine. "What's your favorite lesson to teach?" he asked, and Felicia seized the chance to shift the mood, describing how she turned fractions into a game with pizza slices, her hands gesturing animatedly. Ulysses chuckled, his hand brushing hers under the table, a small anchor in the storm of Penelope's scrutiny. But Penelope wasn't done. "It's admirable, really," she said, sipping her wine, "choosing such a modest path. I suppose it suits some people. The word modest hung in the air, heavy with implication. Felicia's smile tightened, her mind racing. Was it her job, her background, or her blackness that Penelope found so lacking? Ulysses jumped in, his voice light but firm. Mom, Felicia's kids adore her. You should see her classroom. It's like a museum of their artwork. Penelope's eyes flickered, her smile unwavering but cold. How charming, she said, and Felicia felt the room shrink, the chandelier's light suddenly too bright, the air too thick. She tried to bridge the gap. She'd baked a pecan pie, her father's recipe, and brought it as a gesture of goodwill. When she presented it after dinner, Penelope raised an eyebrow. Homemade? How thoughtful. She took a small bite, her expression unreadable, and set it aside. Felicia's heart sank, but she pressed on, asking Penelope about her legal career, hoping to find common ground. Penelope's answers were clipped, her stories of courtroom triumphs laced with a subtle boast. Her world was one of power, prestige, and pedigree. Felicia, with her South Side roots and public school salary, was an anomaly, a curiosity at best. Walter was kinder, sharing a story about a teacher who'd inspired him decades ago, but his warmth couldn't erase Penelope's chill. As the evening wore on, Felicia caught the glances between mother and son, Penelope's raised brow, Ulysses's quick headshake, as if pleading for peace. He didn't see the full weight of her words, the way they cut with surgical precision, dressed up as concern. Growing up in this world, he'd learned to navigate its subtleties, to shrug off its barbs as normal. But for Felicia, each comment was a reminder. She was an outsider, tolerated but not embraced. As they drove back to the city, Ulysses reached for her hand. See? They liked you, he said, his grin boyish, hopeful. Felicia forced a smile, her throat tight. She wanted to believe him, to cling to the love that felt so real in the coffee shop, in her classroom, in the park where they'd laughed over tacos. But the mansion's shadow lingered, its opulence a stark contrast to her modest apartment, her simple life. Penelope's words echoed, noble, modest, spiritually rewarding, each one a brick in a wall she hadn't expected to face. She told herself love would be enough, that she could win them over with time, with kindness. She'd keep showing up, bringing pies, remembering birthdays, biting her tongue when Penelope's smiles turned sharp. For Ulysses, for their future, she'd try. But as the city lights blurred past, Felicia felt a quiet resolve stir within her. She was more than they saw, more than their assumptions. And deep down, she knew this dinner was only the beginning of a battle she hadn't chosen. The air in Grant Park was thick with the scent of blooming cherry blossoms, their pink petals drifting like confetti in the late afternoon breeze. Felicia Thompson stood beneath a sprawling tree, her heart racing as Ulysses Carter, her love of 6 months, dropped to one knee. His hazel eyes shimmered with a sincerity that made her breath catch. In his hand, a velvet box revealed a diamond ring that sparkled like a star against the fading light. Felicia, he said, his voice steady but soft, you're my everything. Will you marry me? Tears welled in her eyes, not from doubt, but from a joy so pure it felt like flying. She nodded, words failing her, and whispered, yes. Ulysses slid the ring onto her finger, its weight unfamiliar but thrilling. They laughed, kissed, and held each other as the park seemed to glow around them, the city's hum fading into a dreamlike hush. For those 30 seconds, Felicia was living a fairy tale, her heart full, her future bright. The magic lingered as they drove to the Carter mansion to share the news, Felicia's hand resting on Ulysses's, the ring catching the dashboard lights. She imagined a warm evening, perhaps a toast, a moment of acceptance from his family. But as they stepped into the grand foyer, with its marble floors and towering chandelier, the air shifted. Penelope Carter emerged from the dining room, her emerald eyes narrowing as she spotted the ring. Walter, her husband, followed, his smile genuine but cautious. Ulysses, beaming, announced, Mom, Dad, we're engaged. Felicia braced for congratulations, but Penelope's lips curved into a smile that was all edges, no warmth. Well, she said, her voice crisp as frost, I suppose we'll need to discuss a prenup. The word landed like a stone, shattering the fairy tale. Ulysses's grin faltered, his hand tightening on Felicia's. "Mom, can we at least celebrate first?" he asked, a plea in his tone. But Penelope's gaze never left Felicia, as if measuring her worth. They sat in the study, a room heavy with leather-bound books and the scent of polished wood. Penelope poured tea, her movements deliberate, each clink of the porcelain a quiet assertion of control. Walter sat quietly, his eyes darting between his wife and son. Felicia's stomach churned, the ring suddenly heavy on her finger. She'd known the Carters' world was different, wealthy, polished, exclusive. But this felt like a trap springing shut. Penelope's voice was calm, almost maternal as she spoke. "Felicia, dear, it's not personal. Ulysses has worked tirelessly to build his career, his wealth. With your circumstances, we must protect what he's earned." The word circumstances hung in the air, laced with unspoken meaning. Her blackness, her working-class roots, her life as a teacher with a modest salary. Felicia's throat tightened, but she nodded, her smile a mask to hide the sting. That evening, Penelope called Felicia directly, her voice smooth as silk over steel. "I hope you understand, dear. This is just practical. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings." The prenup arrived the next day, delivered by a courier in a crisp envelope that felt like a summons. Felicia sat at her small kitchen table, the document spread before her, its pages dense with legal jargon. The terms were brutal. She'd have no claim to Ulysses's assets, no matter how long they were married. If they divorced, she'd receive minimal alimony for only 2 years. If Ulysses died, she'd get a small life insurance payout, nothing more. The cruelest clause was the last. If she ever tarnished the Carter family name through scandal, embarrassment, or undefined missteps, she'd walk away with nothing. Each word felt like a judgment, branding her a threat, a gold digger, a woman who didn't belong in their world. Ulysses came over that night, his tie loosened, his eyes apologetic. "It's just a formality, babe," he said, sitting beside her, his hand on her knee. "It doesn't change us." But his words felt hollow, his wince as he glanced at the document betraying his discomfort. Felicia stared at the pages, her heart a tangle of love and doubt. She loved Ulysses, the man who brought her coffee, who taped up her students' artwork, who made her laugh until her sides ached. But this prenup wasn't about love. It was about power, about Penelope's belief that Felicia was less, that her love was suspect. "Why does it have to be like this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ulysses sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's my mom. She's protective. It's not about you." But it was about her, and they both knew it. Felicia's fingers trembled as she held the pen, the prenup glaring up at her. She wanted to fight, to tear it up, to demand Ulysses stand up to his mother. But love made her hesitate. She thought of their moments together, the park, the coffee shop, the way his eyes lit up when she smiled. Maybe this was the price of their future, a test she could endure. She signed, her tears blotting the ink, each stroke of the pen a surrender to Penelope's world. Ulysses pulled her close, whispering promises that felt fragile against the weight of that signature. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent to the battle in her heart. Felicia clung to the hope that love would be enough, that she could prove her worth beyond their doubts. But as she lay awake that night, the prenup's clauses echoed, a quiet warning that this was only the beginning of a fight she hadn't chosen. The lawyer's office was a sterile cage of glass and steel, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing Chicago's skyline, like a taunt of freedom beyond Felicia Thompson's reach. She sat across a polished mahogany desk, the prenup spread before her like a verdict waiting to be signed. At 28, her beauty was undeniable. Her dark skin radiant, even under the harsh fluorescent lights, her tight curls swept into a low bun that accentuated her sharp cheekbones. But today, her eyes, usually bright with the spark of teaching third graders, were clouded with doubt. The document's pages, crisp and unyielding, seemed to pulse with Penelope Carter's presence, though the retired lawyer sat just a few feet away, her emerald dress as immaculate as her composure. Penelope's smile was a practiced curve, smug and unyielding, her pale blue eyes watching Felicia like a hawk circling prey. The lawyer, a gaunt man with a voice like dry paper, droned through the prenup's clauses. No claim to Mr. Carter's assets, regardless of marital duration, he intoned, adjusting his glasses. In the event of divorce, alimony is limited to 2 years at a predetermined rate. Upon death, a modest life insurance payout, but no access to the estate. Felicia's stomach twisted, each word a barbed wire tightening around her heart. The final clause was the cruelest. If she tarnished the Carter family name through scandal, embarrassment, or some vague misstep, she'd walk away with nothing. The language was clinical, but its intent was clear. She was a threat, a black woman from the South Side whose love for Ulysses Carter was suspect, her motives reduced to greed in their eyes. Ulysses sat beside her, his tailored suit slightly rumpled, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. "It's just a formality, babe," he whispered, his hazel eyes pleading for her to understand. But his voice trembled, betraying his discomfort, and his failure to meet her gaze spoke louder than his words. Felicia stared at the pen in her hand, its weight heavier than the diamond ring on her finger. She loved Ulysses, the man who'd laughed with her over bad jokes in a coffee shop, who'd taped up her students' crayon drawings like they were masterpieces, who'd made her believe in a future built on trust. But this moment, this sterile office, felt like a betrayal of that trust, a test not of her love, but of her worth. Penelope's voice cut through the silence, smooth as polished glass. "Felicia, dear, you understand why this is necessary. It's about protecting Ulysses, his future." The word dear was a dagger, coated in sweetness but sharp with condescension. Felicia's throat tightened, her mind flashing to the dinner at the Carter mansion, where Penelope's subtle jabs, noble, modest, spiritually rewarding, had painted her as less. She wanted to scream, to tear the document to shreds, to demand why her love was seen as a transaction to be policed. But the weight of Penelope's gaze, the lawyer's impatient tapping, and Ulysses's silence pressed down on her, a suffocating reminder of the world she was marrying into. "Why does it have to be like this?" Felicia asked, her voice low, trembling with a mix of hurt and defiance. Ulysses shifted, his hand finally finding hers, but his touch felt fragile, like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "It's my mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's just cautious. It doesn't mean anything about us." But it meant everything. It meant the Carters saw her as a gold digger, a woman whose background, black, working class, a teacher with a modest salary, made her unworthy of their trust. It meant Ulysses, the man she loved, wouldn't stand up to his mother's prejudice, choosing peace over her dignity. Felicia's eyes burned with unshed tears as she stared at the signature line. She thought of her father, Roland, who'd raised her alone in a small Southside apartment, teaching her to hold her head high, no matter who tried to make her feel small. She thought of her students, their trusting faces, the way they looked to her for strength. Signing this prenup felt like betraying that strength, admitting she was exactly what Penelope thought, a woman who needed to be contained, controlled, kept in her place. But love, fierce, stubborn love, made her hesitate. She saw Ulysses's smile in the park, heard his laughter in her classroom, felt his hand in hers under a cherry tree. Maybe this was the price of their future, a hurdle she could clear to prove her love was real. Her hand shook as she lifted the pen, the room shrinking to the sound of her heartbeat. The lawyer's pen scratched as he made a note. Penelope's smile widened, and Ulysses's breath caught, as if he sensed the gravity of this moment. Felicia's tears fell, blotting the paper, each drop a silent protest against the injustice of it all. She signed her name, Felicia Thompson, in slow, deliberate strokes, each letter a wound she inflicted on herself. The ink dried, sealing her into a contract that branded her as less, a threat to be neutralized. Penelope's satisfaction was palpable, her smile a victory lap in a game Felicia hadn't known they were playing. "Thank you, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "This is best for everyone." Ulysses pulled her close as they left the office, his arm around her shoulders, but the gesture felt hollow. "It's over now," he murmured, as if words could erase the humiliation. Felicia nodded, her tears drying, but her heart was a storm of anger and resolve. She'd signed for love, to prove she wasn't what they thought, but the act had cracked something inside her. The city's lights blurred past as they drove, the prenup's weight heavier than the ring on her finger. She clung to the hope that Ulysses's love would outweigh his family's prejudice, that she could endure this test. But deep down, a quiet fire sparked, a determination to never again let anyone make her feel small. The signature was done, but Felicia Thompson's fight was just beginning. The hospital room was a sterile prison of beeping monitors and antiseptic air, the fluorescent lights casting stark shadows across Felicia Thompson's face. At 28, her beauty remained striking, her dark skin glowing faintly despite the exhaustion etched into her features, her tight curls tucked under a scarf as she sat vigil by her father's bedside. Roland Thompson, her anchor since she was 6, lay frail beneath a thin hospital blanket, his once strong frame diminished by a sudden heart attack at his office. The man who'd raised her alone in their modest Southside apartment, who never missed her school plays or science fairs, was slipping away. Felicia held his hand, her fingers tracing the calluses earned from years of what she thought was a mundane clerical job. His breasts were shallow, each one a fragile thread tethering him to her world. Roland's eyes fluttered open, their familiar warmth piercing through the haze of pain. "Baby girl," he whispered, his voice a gravelly shadow of its former strength. "When this is over, go to First National. Safety deposit box. Everything's there." Felicia's heart clenched, confusion mingling with grief. "Dad, don't talk like that," she said, her voice cracking. "You're gonna be fine." But Roland squeezed her hand, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Just promise me," he murmured. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks, unable to imagine a world without his steady presence. Ulysses Carter, her fiancé, sat quietly in the corner, his hazel eyes soft with concern. He'd been there for 3 days, bringing her coffee, rubbing her shoulders, his tailored suit rumpled from sleepless nights. His quiet support reminded her why she loved him, why she'd signed that brutal prenup, despite its sting. Hours later, Roland's hand went limp, the monitors flatlining into a piercing wail. Felicia's world shattered. She clung to his hand, sobbing, as nurses gently ushered her away. Ulysses held her, his arms a lifeline as she wept, her grief a raw, untamed storm. The funeral was simple, held in a small Southside church Roland loved, its pews filled with neighbors, a few of Felicia's fellow teachers, and colleagues from his office job she barely knew. Ulysses stood by her side, his hands steady on her back as she delivered a eulogy, her voice breaking as she spoke of Roland's pride in her, his lessons of resilience. "He taught me to never let anyone make me feel small," she said, her eyes glistening. The words felt like a vow, a spark of strength amidst the ache. A week later, Felicia's phone rang, the caller ID showing an unfamiliar number. "Miss Thompson, this is Mr. Grayson," a calm voice said. "I was your father's attorney for over 20 years. We need to meet about his estate." Felicia almost laughed, the idea absurd. An estate? Roland drove a beat-up Toyota, lived in a rented apartment with mismatched furniture, and wore the same worn jacket every winter. What estate could he possibly have? But curiosity and Roland's final words pulled her to Grayson's office, a modest suite downtown with faded carpet and shelves crammed with legal files. Grayson, a wiry man with kind eyes, handed her a key. "Your father was clear," he said. "You're to open the safety deposit box alone. Read everything inside, then we'll talk." Felicia's hands trembled as she drove to First National, the key heavy in her pocket. The bank was an imposing relic, its marble columns and brass fixtures radiating old-world gravitas. A clerk led her to a vault where the safety deposit box waited, larger than she'd expected. Her heart pounded as she turned the key, the metal lid creaking open to reveal a trove that stole her breath. Inside were neatly organized documents, photographs, and handwritten letters, each item a piece of a puzzle she'd never known existed. Her fingers brushed a yellowed newspaper clipping, the headline bold: "Tech entrepreneur Roland Thompson sells CyberGuard solutions for $2.8 billion." A younger Roland stared back from the photo, shaking hands with suited executives, his smile confident but humble. Felicia's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair provided by the clerk, her mind reeling. Roland, her quiet father, who packed her lunches and cheered at her track meets, was a billionaire? She rifled through the box, each item deepening the shock. Stock certificates, bank statements, and photos of Roland at charity galas, standing beside names she recognized from business magazines, painted a life she'd never imagined. A letter written in his familiar scrawl anchored the collection. "Baby girl," it began, "I wanted you to grow up knowing your worth comes from your heart, not your wallet. I built a fortune, but I chose a simple life for us so you'd be strong, grounded, free from the weight of wealth." Tears blurred her vision as she read on, learning how Roland had founded a tech company in the early 90s, revolutionizing software for financial institutions before selling it for billions. The letter revealed more. Roland had spent his life quietly giving back, funding scholarships, community centers, and schools, all while raising her in their modest apartment to shield her from the complications of wealth. Felicia clutched the letter, her sobs echoing in the vault. Her father's love, his sacrifice, overwhelmed her. He'd hidden this secret not to deceive her, but to protect her, to ensure she grew up valuing herself beyond money. The prenup, with its cruel clauses and Penelope's smug smile, flashed in her mind, a bitter contrast to Roland's trust in her strength. She sat there surrounded by documents that rewrote her past, her grief mingling with awe. Roland's final gift was a truth she wasn't ready for, a secret that would change everything she thought she knew about her place in the world. The vault at First National Bank was a cold, silent crypt, its steel walls amplifying the tremor in Felicia Thompson's hands as she sat before her father's safety deposit box. At 28, her beauty was undimmed by grief, her dark skin catching the dim light, her tight curls tucked under a scarf, her eyes wide with disbelief. The box, a metal relic of secrets, lay open, spilling documents, photographs, and letters that rewrote the life she thought she knew. Her father, Roland Thompson, had died days ago, leaving behind a whispered instruction to find this box. Now, as she sifted through its contents, Felicia felt the ground shift beneath her, each piece a fragment of a truth too vast to grasp. The air was heavy, the only sound her ragged breaths and the rustle of paper as she uncovered the impossible. Her quiet, humble father was a billionaire. The first item to seize her was a newspaper clipping, its edges yellowed but the headline stark. Tech entrepreneur Roland Thompson sells CyberGuard solutions for $2.8 billion. The photo showed a younger Roland, his smile confident yet reserved, shaking hands with executives in a boardroom she'd never imagined him in. Felicia's heart pounded, her fingers tracing his face, so familiar yet alien in this context. The man who'd driven a beat-up Toyota, who'd packed her lunches in their modest Southside apartment, had built a tech empire? She dug deeper, her hands trembling as she pulled out stock certificates, bank statements, and investment portfolios, each document a brick in a fortune she'd never suspected. Photos followed, Roland at charity galas, his arm around philanthropists, his name in captions alongside tech moguls from Forbes covers and Wall Street Journal spreads. Felicia's breath hitched as she found a letter in Roland's familiar scrawl, the ink slightly faded, but his voice vivid on the page. "Baby girl," it began, "I wanted you to grow up knowing your worth comes from your heart, not your wallet. I built CyberGuard from nothing, a dream born in a garage when you were just a toddler. When I sold it, the world saw a billionaire. But I saw a father who wanted his daughter to be strong, grounded, free from wealth's burdens." Tears stung her eyes, blurring the words. Roland explained how he'd founded his company in the early 90s, creating software that revolutionized financial security for banks. The sale in 1995 made him one of the youngest black billionaires in America. But he chose a simple life, shielding Felicia from the spotlight to give her a childhood untainted by money's weight. The letter continued, each sentence a revelation. "I lived modestly so you'd learn resilience, so you'd know your value lies in who you are, not what you have," he wrote. "But now you're ready to carry this responsibility. Use it wisely, baby girl. Make a difference." Felicia's sobs echoed in the vault, her fingers clutching the paper as if it could bring him back. Roland hadn't just hidden his wealth. He'd poured it into the world, funding scholarships for kids like her, building community centers, supporting schools in underserved neighborhoods. Photos showed him at ribbon cuttings, his smile quiet but proud, always in the background, never seeking the spotlight. He'd given away millions, all while raising her in a rented apartment with mismatched furniture, teaching her to hold her head high no matter who tried to make her feel small. Felicia's mind reeled, the numbers in the bank statements staggering. Liquid assets, real estate, investment portfolios totaling $2.8 billion. After taxes and Roland's ongoing charitable commitments, she stood to inherit it all. She sat back, her hands shaking, the vault's cold air pressing against her skin. The prenup she'd signed for Ulysses Carter flashed in her mind, its brutal clauses, Penelope Carter's smug smile as she watched Felicia sign, branding her a gold digger, a threat to their wealth. The irony was a knife. The Carters had judged her for her modest roots, yet she was now wealthier than their entire dynasty. Her father's secret turned their assumptions to dust, exposing the absurdity of their distrust. She lingered in the vault for hours, rereading Roland's letter, studying every photo, each one a window into a life he'd kept hidden to protect her. There he was, shaking hands with a senator, cutting a ribbon at a school he'd funded, laughing with community leaders at a gala. Yet he'd come home to their tiny apartment, grilling burgers for her birthday, cheering at her track meets, teaching her to navigate a world that often saw her as less. His sacrifice overwhelmed her, living simply so she could grow up free from the complications of wealth, grounded in her strength. The prenup, with its clauses stripping her of rights, felt like a distant echo now, its cruelty dwarfed by Roland's faith in her. As she closed the box, Felicia's tears dried, replaced by a quiet fire. Roland's gift wasn't just the billions, it was the lesson that her worth was never tied to money or others' approval. The Carters had seen her as a threat, but her father had seen her as limitless. She tucked the letter into her purse, its words a lifeline, a promise to honor his legacy. The vault door clicked shut behind her, the bank's marble halls looming as she stepped into the light. Felicia Thompson was no longer just a teacher, no longer just Ulysses's fiancée. She was the daughter of a man who'd built a fortune and given it away, a woman whose value no document could define. The world she'd known was gone, and a new one, vast, daunting, hers, was waiting. The Carter Mansion's dining room gleamed with opulence, its crystal chandelier casting prisms across a mahogany table laden with fine china and a spread of roasted duck and herb risotto. Felicia Thompson, radiant at 28, her dark skin glowing under the soft light, sat with a quiet confidence that belied the storm within her. Her tight curls were swept into an elegant updo, accentuating the sharp lines of her cheekbones. But her eyes held a new fire, kindled by the revelation of her father's $2.8 billion legacy. She'd come to this dinner not as the modest teacher the Carters had judged, but as a woman transformed by truth, her inheritance a secret weapon tucked beneath her composed exterior. Ulysses Carter, her fiancé, sat beside her, his hazel eyes flickering with nervous pride, unaware of the bombshell she carried. Across the table, Penelope Carter presided like a queen, her silver blonde hair impeccable, her smile a polished mask of condescension. The air was thick with the usual tension, Penelope's voice slicing through the clink of silverware. "Felicia, how's teaching?" she asked, her tone dripping with false warmth, as if Felicia's job were a quaint hobby. "It must be so rewarding in its way." The jab was familiar, a reminder of the Carters' view of her as less black, working class, unworthy of their world. Felicia smiled, her heart steady, and decided it was time. "Actually," she said, her voice calm but deliberate, "I'm taking some time off. I've got family business to handle. Financial advisors, that sort of thing." Penelope's eyebrow arched, her lips curving into a patronizing smirk. "Oh, how sweet," she said, patting Felicia's hand like a child who'd found a dollar. "It's nice to have a little something saved, isn't it?" Felicia's pulse quickened, but her smile didn't waver. She reached into her purse, her movements slow, deliberate, and slid a folder of bank statements across the table. The numbers, $2.8 billion in assets, investments, and properties, stared up like a challenge. The room fell silent, the clink of Walter Carter's wine glass halting midair. Penelope's face drained of color, her eyes darting over the figures as if they were a foreign language. Walter, usually reserved, coughed, his wine catching in his throat. Ulysses stared, his mouth slightly agape, the papers trembling in his hands. "Felicia?" he whispered. "What is this?" She met his gaze, her voice steady as steel. "My father was Roland Thompson, founder of CyberGuard Solutions. Maybe you've heard of him." The name landed like a thunderclap, the weight of her father's tech empire reshaping the room. Penelope's composure cracked, her lips parting in a stammer. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice thin, almost pleading. "These numbers, they can't be right." Felicia leaned back, her calm unshaken. "They're right," she said. "My father sold his company for $2.8 billion. He chose to raise me simply, but he left me everything." Walter's eyes widened, recognition dawning. "You're Roland Thompson's daughter?" he asked, his voice tinged with awe. "The Roland Thompson?" Felicia nodded, savoring the shift in the air. The Carters, who dismissed her as a charity case, were unraveling. Penelope's hands trembled as she set down her fork, her mind racing to rewrite the narrative she'd crafted about Felicia. The silence stretched, taut and electric. Then Penelope tried to recover, her voice syrupy with false praise. "Well, Roland was a brilliant man," she said, forcing a smile. "Such business acumen. And you, Felicia, must be so proud of your family values." The words were desperate, a scramble to reclaim control. Walter, sensing opportunity, leaned forward, his tone suddenly collegial. "What was CyberGuard's core innovation? I read about their encryption algorithms." "Groundbreaking," Felicia answered coolly, detailing her father's work as if she'd always known it, though the truth was still raw, a wound and a gift intertwined. She watched the Carters' faces, Penelope's forced warmth, Walter's eager curiosity, Ulysses' stunned silence, and felt a quiet power settle within her. Ulysses finally spoke, his voice low, almost wounded. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Felicia's heart tightened, but her resolve held firm. "I wanted to know who you were when I had nothing," she said, her words cutting through the room's pretense. "I wanted to see if you'd defend me against your mother's doubts." His silence at past dinners, his failure to challenge Penelope's slights, hung between them like a verdict. Ulysses looked away, his jaw tight, the weight of his inaction dawning. Penelope, sensing the moment's fragility, tried to pivot, her voice bright with false enthusiasm. "This changes everything, doesn't it? We should celebrate. Perhaps a family trip. Or—" Felicia cut her off with a raised hand, her gaze unwavering. "What's changed, Penelope?" she asked. "My bank account, or the way you see me?" The question hung, unanswered, as the Carters squirmed. Penelope's smile faltered, Walter busied himself with his napkin, and Ulysses stared at the table, his hands clenched. Felicia's mind flashed to the prenup, its clauses branding her a threat, a gold digger. Now, with her father's billions behind her, the document was a cruel irony, a testament to the Carters' misjudgment. She didn't gloat, didn't need to. The truth was enough, its weight reshaping the room's power. She'd walked in as the outsider, the teacher they pitied, but now she was Roland Thompson's daughter, a woman whose worth dwarfed their own. As the dinner ended, Penelope's invitations to future events felt hollow, Walter's questions desperate, and Ulysses' silence deafening. Felicia stood, her head high, her father's legacy a fire in her veins. The Carters had underestimated her, but the truth had set her free. The Chicago skyline glittered through Felicia Thompson's apartment window, a constellation of lights that felt both familiar and distant. At 28, her beauty was a quiet force, her dark skin radiant in the soft glow of a single lamp, her tight curls loose around her shoulders, her eyes burning with a resolve forged by truth. The revelation of her father's $2.8 billion legacy had shifted her world, but the prenup she'd signed for Ulysses Carter still lay in a drawer, its inked clauses a stark reminder of the Carters' distrust. Now as she sat on her worn couch, the diamond ring Ulysses had given her rested in her palm, its sparkle dulled by the weight of what it represented. Her heart, once tethered to his, was unraveling, each thread snapping under the strain of his silence, his family's prejudice, and her awakening. Ulysses sat across from her, his tailored suit rumpled, his hazel eyes pleading. "Felicia, we can fix this," he said, his voice low, almost desperate. "Let's tear up the prenup. Start over. We love each other, don't we?" The words hung between them, fragile as glass. Felicia's gaze hardened, her father's letter echoing in her mind. "Your worth comes from your heart, not your wallet." She thought of the dinners at the Carter mansion, Penelope's cutting smiles, the way Ulysses had let her slight slide, choosing peace over her dignity. "Would you have loved me differently if I'd told you sooner?" she asked, her voice steady but sharp. "Would your mother have respected me, or would you have just found new ways to let me feel small?" Ulysses's silence was an answer, his jaw tight, his eyes dropping to the floor. The relationship limped on for weeks, each day a battle against the truth. Ulysses couldn't reconcile Felicia's wealth, which dwarfed his family's, nor the role reversal it forced. He'd fallen for the idea of being her savior, lifting her into his world. Now with her billions, he was adrift, his identity shaken. Penelope's attempts to mend the rift were transparent. Invitations to charity galas, sudden praise for Felicia's strength that reeked of opportunism. At a tense coffee meeting, Penelope's voice dripped with false warmth. "You're practically family now," she said, her emerald dress as pristine as her agenda. Felicia saw through it. Penelope didn't value her. She valued her bank account. The realization was a cold clarity, sharpening her resolve to walk away. One evening, Felicia met Ulysses at their favorite park bench, the cherry tree now bare, its branches stark against the dusk. She handed him the ring, its weight no longer hers to carry. "The man I loved wouldn't have let me sign that prenup," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. "He'd have stood up to his mother, seen my worth before he knew my net worth." Ulysses's face crumpled, but he took the ring, his fingers trembling. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but apologies couldn't erase the past. Felicia kept the prenup, not out of bitterness, but as a talisman, a reminder to never settle for less than she deserved. As she walked away, the city's pulse felt like her own, a rhythm of freedom, of possibility. Felicia channeled her father's legacy into action, founding the Roland Thompson Foundation with a mission to fund education and uplift underserved communities. She poured millions into scholarships, community centers, and schools, her father's quiet philanthropy now her own. Yet she didn't abandon teaching. She built a school in the South Side, its bright classrooms a tribute to Roland's belief in learning's power. Standing before her students, their eager faces mirroring those she'd taught for years, Felicia felt a joy money couldn't buy. She was no longer just a teacher, she was a force, shaping futures as her father had shaped hers. In a grocery store one evening, Felicia's cart bumped into a stranger's, apples tumbling to the floor. A man laughed, bending to help, his warm brown eyes crinkling with humor. "We've got an apple avalanche here," he said, his voice light. Marcus, a social worker with a quick wit and a heart as big as a city, knew nothing of her wealth. They talked for hours, laughing over spilled fruit, swapping stories of their work, his with foster kids, hers with her students. Marcus saw her, not her billions, his admiration rooted in her spirit, her laugh, the way she lit up when she spoke of her classroom. He stood by her fiercely, his loyalty unshaken by the world's judgments, a stark contrast to Ulysses's wavering. Felicia's heart, once bruised, began to heal. Marcus didn't need to save her. He simply loved her, his presence a steady warmth. Roland's gift wasn't just the billions. It was the lesson that true wealth lay in knowing her worth, untethered to others' approval. The prenup, meant to protect Ulysses, had saved Felicia from a family that couldn't see her value. It was her most profound education, a lesson in self-worth she'd carry forever. As she stood in her new school, watching her students draw dreams in crayon, Felicia felt her father's pride, her strength, and the promise of a life built on her terms. The morning sun spilled through the wide windows of a cozy Chicago brownstone, casting golden patches across a living room cluttered with crayons, stuffed animals, and a pair of tiny sneakers tossed haphazardly by the couch. The black woman, now 30, stood at the heart of this joyful chaos, her long black hair tied loosely in a braid, her dark skin glowing with a warmth that came from within. Her beauty was undimmed, softened by a radiant peace, her eyes sparkling as she watched two identical 4-year-old girls, her twin daughters, giggle over a tower of colorful blocks. Their tight curls bounced as they babbled, their laughter a melody that filled the home with life. This was her sanctuary, a world she'd built on her terms, far from the cold marble of the Carter mansion and the sting of a prenup that once tried to define her worth. Marcus, her husband, entered the room, his brown eyes crinkling with a grin as he balanced a tray of pancakes shaped like hearts. A social worker with a heart as big as the city, he wore a faded t-shirt and jeans, his presence a steady anchor in their vibrant home. He'd fallen for her laugh in a grocery store, knowing nothing of her $2.8 billion inheritance, and loved her fiercely for who she was, a woman of strength, grace, and unshakable resolve. "Breakfast fit for my queens," he announced, setting the tray on a low table as the twins, Amara and Aisha, squealed and scrambled over. The woman knelt beside them, her bold gold bracelet glinting as she cut their pancakes, her large hoop earrings swaying with each laugh. This was family, not the calculated alliances of wealth, but a bond woven from shared moments and unconditional love. The twins were a whirlwind of energy, their identical faces lit with curiosity. Amara, the bolder of the two, smeared syrup on her cheek, declaring, "I'm gonna build a pancake tower." Aisha, quieter but mischievous, giggled and added a strawberry to the structure, toppling it into a sticky mess. The woman laughed, her voice rich and unguarded, a sound that hadn't come easily in the days of Penelope's icy smiles. Marcus caught her eye, his hand brushing hers, a silent promise of partnership. Their love had grown in the ordinary, late-night talks over coffee, dancing in the kitchen, and comforting the twins after nightmares. He'd stood by her through every challenge, from navigating her father's vast legacy to facing whispers of prejudice that lingered in the world beyond their door. The brownstone was a reflection of their life together, its walls adorned with the twins' finger paintings and photos of family outings, picnics in Grant Park, zoo trips where Amara roared at the lions, Aisha clutching her mother's hand. A framed letter from her father, Roland, hung in the hallway, its words a guiding light. "Your worth comes from your heart." The woman had honored his legacy through the Roland Thompson Foundation, funding schools and scholarships. But her greatest joy was here, in this home, with her daughter's laughter and Marcus's steady love. She still taught at the school she'd built, her classroom a haven where she saw her daughter's curiosity mirrored in her students' eyes. Yet the past lingered faintly, like a shadow cast by a distant storm. The prenup, still tucked in a drawer, was a reminder of a time when she'd let love blind her to her own value. Now, as she watched Amara and Aisha chase each other around the couch, she vowed they'd grow up knowing their worth, untouched by the judgments she'd once endured. Marcus, sensing her quiet moment, sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. She nodded, her eyes on the twins. "I'm more than okay," she said. "I'm home." His kiss on her forehead was a seal on their shared life, a promise that needed no paper to bind it. The twins tugged at her hands, pulling her into their game. "Mama, be the dragon!" Amara demanded, brandishing a toy sword. The woman roared playfully, scooping them up, their giggles filling the air as Marcus joined in, pretending to be a knight. The room dissolved into chaos, blocks toppling, pancakes forgotten, love the only currency that mattered. This was the wealth her father had wanted for her, not the billions, but the freedom to live authentically, surrounded by those who saw her true value. The Carter's world, with its chandeliers and cold contracts, felt like a distant memory, a lesson that had forged her strength but no longer defined her. As the sun climbed higher, the family settled on the couch, the twins nestled between them, syrup-sticky fingers clutching a storybook. The woman read aloud, her voice weaving tales of brave princesses, her daughter's eyes wide with wonder. Marcus's hand rested on hers, their fingers entwined, a quiet testament to a love that needed no proof. This was her family, her legacy, A life built not on wealth or approval, but on the unyielding truth of who she was. The prenup had once tried to cage her, but now in the warmth of her brownstone, with her twins' laughter and Marcus's love, Felicia Thompson was free. What did Felicia's journey teach you about love, worth, and standing tall against judgment? Her story, from a prenup's sting to her father's billion-dollar secret, reminds us that true value lies within, not in others' eyes or bank accounts. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a moment that redefined your sense of self? Your stories inspire us all. A huge thank you for joining us on this emotional ride. Your support keeps these tales alive. Smash that subscribe button to catch our next story and let us know where you're tuning in from. Until next time, keep shining because your worth is more than anyone's opinion. See you soon.